Welcome to Women Don't Do That, where we empower you with inspiration, knowledge, and skills to redefine your boundaries and unleash your potential. I'm Stephanie Minton, founder and CEO of Beacon North Strategies and your guide. Small town girl turned CEO while navigating career, motherhood, ADHD, and chronic migraines. Our conversations range from interviews with visionary women to solo episodes filled with actionable insights. We are your hub for turning what ifs into let's go. Are you ready to redefine your possible? Let's get started. Welcome back to Women Don't Do That. I'm your host, Stephanie Minton, and today we're celebrating a huge milestone. It's our 200th episode. I can't explain how excited I am to be here with you today and having these conversations. I want to talk about how it all started. Originally, I started the podcast with my friend Miranda Novak, and Miranda usually comes back every year for our reflection show in December, and she often will also jump in different periods of times as a guest, or even has continued to host here and there when I need help and somebody to step in. And so I first want to just thank her for the courage to start something new with me, and it really was such a joy to work together. And sometimes you don't always have that with friends. And so it was a really positive experience. And so I want to thank her for all of her hard work and her willingness to step forward into something new and bold. So, how the podcast originated, I had resigned my job to run for politics. I think it was around 2018. And there was a by-election. So I was running for nomination in a safe riding, which meant whoever became the candidate would win the election. And I was surprised about how much sexism I faced at the door. I was told, not to describe myself with certain words, that I should be wearing heels, even though you're walking door to door. And if you've ever door knocked, it's a ton of walking. And how to dress, how to talk about myself. And I even had male farmers that said they wouldn't vote for me just because I was a woman. And I found that really frustrating because I am an advocate, a lobbyist by trade, and I work in government relations. I had worked for politicians in Ottawa, and so I knew how the system worked. And so I knew that I had the best qualifications to advocate for my community, because I had advocated for many issues and been successful with the government on those issues. And I really wanted that opportunity to advocate for my home community. Well, I lost the nomination, and I wouldn't say that it was just because I was a woman, of course, but it was a bit of a unique experience for me as a woman, I would say. And I was down about that afterwards. It was hard to lose. I also had quit my job, and I had been doing government relations for a long time, and I didn't know what I wanted to do next. And I was disheartened by some of those messages. There was also a lot of women who weren't interested in politics. It was hard to get women to rally behind me and the cause as well, or would say, oh, I have to ask my husband, or things like that. And so I went and visited my friend Miranda, kind of broken and tired, and we were just kind of talking through what next. And I think someone had maybe planted the seed of maybe a podcast, and Women Don't Do That for me became my do something about it. I'm very action oriented. I like to make change. I'm an advocate at heart, and Women Don't Do That was really about women learning from other women and empowerment and inspiration. Inspiration for women to do whatever it is they think they can't. We initially interviewed a lot of women who worked in male-dominated fields, and we still do that today, but also integrate some other themes and topics as well. And it really gave me an outlet based on my experience. The podcast is over 6 years old now. I think it's about 6.5. A lot of blood, sweat, and tears and time has gone into this podcast, and I have loved doing it. I will say I have also faced a lot of criticism for doing this podcast. I don't talk about that a lot. That's probably the first time I've talked about it on this podcast. And so there's also been a lot of resiliency to work through some of that criticism and some of the barriers that have been put up for me. And luckily, I'm pretty stubborn. And so I am still doing it. And so very excited to be at that 200 mark. It's so exciting. I could have never imagined this when we started. I also want to say that when we started the podcast, Miranda and I knew nothing about starting a podcast. Like, I think we Googled and found a document that said, like, here are all of the steps. And so it was like, you got to buy the microphone, then you have to do this. And then we even had to Google some of the things. Okay, you need, a platform. Uh, and then we would have to Google what that meant, right? So that was very exciting and very challenging, and a lot of resilience to kind of figure things out and believe in yourself. And it was really fun to do that with a friend and figure it out with her. I remember us trying to get really good audio and recording. I think our first recordings were like her in a closet or under a desk or a table. I was in my basement, I think, because originally we just did audio, and it was under our foosball table with a blanket over top of it. And you're scrunched, you can't even sit up straight, and you're trying to get the best audio. And I'm so thankful for so many friends and people in my network that were willing to do this with me and be early guests on the podcast and just believing in what we were building. And so it wasn't an easy thing to start. Podcasts were just kind of starting to take off at that time. And it was a really great outlet for me too during COVID to have something meaningful to contribute to, and also just attachment to the outside world during a time when, you're educating your kids at home, and that was really challenging for people. I also want to talk about a time where it was really challenging. And I've talked about some of those so far, but another one that comes to mind is I had, through my work, met this woman who would be considered like a Canadian celebrity. Not a big, big one, but a Canadian celebrity. And I was so excited and very nervous and kind of surprised and very pleased that she said yes. And I booked a recording studio and paid for it, and thinking like it's going to be professional, the sound is going to be great, all of these things. And the recording didn't work. Like, we couldn't get the audio working. And so we couldn't record the podcast. And she never would rebook with me after that. And that was really hard. And I recognize that people's time is valuable and you don't want to, take advantage of people's time. But that was really disappointing for me. And I've never had a technical issue like that again. And I usually record at home. But that was a bit of a hard one to get over. But certainly lots of no's, right? Like, for, how many people you invite. You could invite 30, 40 people and get 10 or a handful responding. And so you have to definitely be okay with rejection and being resilient when you're taking on something like that. And it does get easier over time. One thing that I was excited about as I was preparing for this episode is I often talk about how the podcast is in over 50 different countries. And I had not looked at the stats of that for a while, but I did look them up today. And the podcast is actually being played now in 89 countries. That is mind blowing for, a woman who grew up in the country in a rural community in Canada, to know that there are people globally listening to this podcast. And I know some of you have been here right from the beginning, and we often talk about this. I remember the first time there was somebody who was listening from Ireland, like one person. And we're like, who is this? This is so exciting. And I love that there are things that we can learn from each other in different parts of the world. Of course, a lot of our guests have been Canadian, which has been exciting to introduce Canadian women and their stories to the world and life here. But we've also interviewed, of course, a lot of Americans because they are our neighbors, and but other global guests as well. And so that's been really exciting. I thought I would highlight a few of our most memorable guest conversations. One of the ones that really stands out to me is the one that I did with my mom. And it was really meaningful to me because I think it's amazing and special and important to think about what we can learn from everyday women. And of course, there's things we can learn from people like Obama, like Michelle Obama or Oprah Winfrey. But my mom is a hairdresser. She's always been a small business owner. She is a phenomenal mom. And her episode is 142. It's all about navigating career, motherhood, and life, what it's like to raise a strong willed daughter, and about her life. She lives with chronic illness, as do I. And just hearing her resilience and how she approaches that was really touching. There were things that I had heard maybe that were new to me in that episode. And if you are someone that's just struggling in your life right now and struggling to keep going, that episode is a great one to check out because she lives that every day. And she does more than most people, to be honest. She's pretty amazing. And I love that we can get those nuggets of wisdom and not just put famous people on a pedestal. A few others that come to mind, episode 21 was with, she owned the Economic Club at the time, and now she's in other ventures, but Rhiannon Rosalind. And in that episode, if I remember correctly, she talked about, and this has always stuck with me, you don't have to be the smartest in the room. You don't have to be the most senior, but you can be the most prepared, and that can make such a difference. And that really has stood out to me and is advice I still give and talk about today. Episode 157 was about migraines, and we talked to a neurologist. Not migraines are a chronic illness that I have, and I know a lot of my friends and family and a lot of listeners also have them too. And so that episode is really fantastic for you to learn more about yourself, but also for people you love to listen to understand more about what life is like for you and understanding more about, what it is, what are some of the symptoms, what are some of the cures, what are some of the challenges. And so that's a really great one to learn more about that topic. Episode 50 is one that has stood in my memory as one that has always stood out. And it's from convict to entrepreneur with Emily O'Brien. Emily was convicted for trafficking, and while she was in prison, developed the idea of starting a popcorn company with flavors. And she has a company today, and they are selling that across Canada. And it's just a really inspirational story about how you don't have to be stuck in your circumstance and your choices, and you can make change in your life and overcoming barriers. And just that inspiration is a great episode. One of the more recent ones that really stands out to me is somebody who's really special to me. It's episode 196, Leadership Loss and the Courage to Keep Showing Up. I've heard from so many of you that this interview was really meaningful. This is Perry Johnston. Perry was my boss years ago. She was the first one that believed in me to be a manager. And she's really been a supporter of my company, Beacon North Strategies, and every organization that she has moved to and led. She has hired me through my company to work with her. And so she's just such a belief in me, but she's also a pretty cool person. Perry, she's actually been on the podcast twice. The first one was really about leadership and how you can grow and change your leadership style and how she did that. Which is quite an amazing story. We hear about leaders, some of the challenges that people have with leaders, but Perry's the type of person who really does the work to be the best leader possible and talks about how to do that in that episode. But the most recent episode, 196, is about her transition from a VP to a president. And she's so authentic and honest. She talks about what she wishes she knew when she looks back on her year. What would have prepped her better for that transition, and just what life is really like as a CEO, and how do you prepare your career to get to a role like that. But also, during Perry's first year, she also lost her son in her first year of being a CEO. And she talks about grief and about navigating leadership like that and being a leader who is experiencing some real challenges in her life and what that looks like and advice she has for women today. And so that one has really stuck out to me. So we have a huge back catalog. There are reflection shows where Miranda and I started out where we would reflect on the different episodes we heard and dig into some of the themes from guests. There are episodes that are just me or Miranda giving advice about things that we're learning or experiencing. We're both professionals. And there are also, of course, interviews. And so there is years of good content on so many different topics from work-life balance to burnout to adoption to, women providing advice, overcoming barriers from being police officers to race car drivers to mechanics. It really is quite a powerful catalog. So, one of the things my team did to help prepare for this episode was to speak to past guests, other people that have been engaged in the podcast or in my life, and questions they had, or quotes, or just something they thought about the podcast. And so, I want to read some of these two. So, the first one is Chantal Petit Leclerc. She was one of our guests, and she's amazing. She was a Paralympic athlete for Canada, won a few times for sure. I don't have all the stats in front of me, but she's now a senator in the Senate of Canada. And so this is what she said. As the host of the Women Who Do That podcast, you've created a powerful platform that amplifies women's voices over the years. Your conversations have sparked critical thinking and inspired action, especially in areas where women are told that they don't and shouldn't. How do you hope the podcast will continue to influence a dialogue about women's rights, leadership, and success on the global front? One thing I have to say about this is a great question. And it really makes me think about where we are in the world today. I love TikTok. I am on social media a lot. I've been doing a lot more on the Women Don't Do That TikTok if you want to check that out. And I am seeing some degradation of the value of women, of women's leadership, of women of leaders, even questions about uh, if women should have the right to vote. And I have been heartbroken and infuriated and frustrated and so many things. And I'm still processing some of that. And so it feels like for me right now that this podcast and what it stands for to inspire women to do whatever it is they think they can't, to be bold, to step up, to take action, to step into who you really are and who you want to be is more important now than it ever has been in my generation. And we are moving backwards. And so I hope that I will continue to be a positive light for women, give them inspiration, help them overcome barriers, have resilience, and give them advice to do that, and to let them know that they are not alone, and to empower them with the knowledge and the skills to do that. Because I do want there to be a practical element of what you take away from this podcast and how you can actually apply it to your life, right? It brings me back to the starting of the podcast, which is the do something, right? We want to do something about the challenges. And so I hope that we can still continue to do that, not just for Canadians, but globally for those listening. And I hope that we can continue to be a positive part of the change that needs to happen and the education that needs to happen so that women have all of the information too for themselves and are aware of all the challenges happening. So another thing she says is with the evolving digital political landscape that is bringing more and more awareness about gender equality, how do you envision your role and your guest stories? I think my previous answer covers that well. And, we've done episodes on equity, diversity, and inclusion and things like that. And we are seeing changes in that. And we've also talked about issues like reconciliation with Rose is an episode to check out on that. And so we're having some of those important conversations. And I hope that we continue to have some of those important conversations. And the other thing I hope is that we can maybe even talk about some of the really controversial or challenging topics, And maybe some of that is a panel discussion where we're able to bring in different views. Sometimes the questions I ask to a guest are a way to bring in some of the different views. And preparing for some of those episodes and getting the right guests or doing a panel is a lot more work and more challenging. And I love the podcast, but it's not something I do full time. But I do find myself, and I don't know, some of that is also now that I'm 40, being more comfortable with having some more of those uncomfortable conversations. And I think we're in a place where we need to. And then she says, in a time when progress and pushback coexist, what gives you hope and drives your mission forward? I'm a very glass half full kind of person, I guess I would say. And I also feel like there's no choice. There's no choice. We have to use our voices to drive positive messages, positive inspiration for people forward when there are challenges. We need to combat misinformation. And not that's not for everybody. And when you do have the skills, the talents, the money, the privilege to do it, then I'm willing to step up and do the work. And I'm very passionate about that. So, someone else, this is my daughter, so maybe kind of a funny question, and she was a guest too, is why did you decide to put so much effort into Women Don't Do That? And I would say to that, that the mission of empowering women is just so important to me. And sometimes we don't even realize some of the challenges. I remember I grew up in a rural community, and when I went to university, I never realized, I didn't even know what feminism was. I also did have one aunt that kept her last name, but like even topics like that had just never really crossed my mind, or I never even thought that they were options for me. And so I just think learning from other women, expanding people's minds, recognizing that you don't have to play small. You can if you want to, but you don't have to. And I want to encourage women to find themselves, find their value and what's important to them, and to not have limits on them. It also has been an outlet for me sometimes in some really challenging times in my life to feel like I'm doing something about really important topics. And I want to make change and I want to make a difference for women. And I would also say that there's some things that I just probably won't talk about, maybe ever, in my life or in people's lives around me. And I think until you've been around some of those types of experiences, that you don't know how unempowered some women are. And so that becomes really important to me. When I ran for politics, I had connected with a group. It was a faith community, and people there don't even vote. And there's lots of rules around women and how they should behave. But this one little girl uh, was so interested in what I was doing and wanted to vote for me. And just those types of engagement with that one girl makes the work and the effort worth it. And I really want to make a difference in people's lives. That's really what I ultimately want for this podcast. It's a free way for people to do that, right? Not everybody has these amazing networks or parents that went to university. I didn't. I didn't. When I moved to Ottawa, which is the capital of Canada, to go to university. So my career has ended up being in and around politics, right? I knew one person that worked in politics. That's it. I had to create that path on my own. And my parents really built up in me the belief that I could do hard things. I could do and be whatever I wanted, a love for knowledge and learning and critical thinking and asking questions. And I was able to use those skill sets and chart my own path and be bold. And when you're coming without all of that, it is a ton of work. Those are big barriers. And I've recognized also as a white woman that is also a very privileged position that I'm in because I don't have some additional barriers that other people have. Anne Douglas, who has also been a guest twice in the podcast. I love Anne Douglas. I'd love to hear you reflect on how you've grown and changed as a person over the course of producing this podcast. 200 episodes represents a lot of conversations. 6 years is a long time. And what a 6 years it's been in the life of the world, which is so true. You were you then. Who were you then? And who have you become? I become more educated about the challenges of women and more empowered, I think, just because of all the advice that I've heard and stories of resilience that I've heard. I think I'm really resilient. And I think the stories that I've listened to and the women I've interacted with have allowed me to be more resilient. And you know what? In down moments, give me encouragement to keep going. And I think that today, more than ever, it's important to continue to have these important conversations. Who have I become? I think I've become also, I've just learned a lot and become way more aware, by having conversations with people about reconciliation, for instance. There's so much to learn from those types of conversations, right? And empathy about people's lives. The woman that I had on that talked about miscarriage, or the one that talked about adoption, and they had adoption fall through multiple times, and just the heartache that people go through is so challenging, right? And so I've just learned a lot more about stepping out of my perfect little bubble that I live in, about what the world is like and what people's lives are like, and helping bring those stories and those women's voices and stories to others to increase their knowledge and skill sets and to empower them to also feel like they can do whatever it is that they think they can't. My friend Heather, who's been on the podcast a few times and recently started her own company, founder and CEO of Firefly Strategic Consulting, wrote this: Congrats, Steph, on 200 episodes. I remember when this podcast was just an idea, and here you are. My question for you is, when you step back and think about your various guests and conversations you've had, what is the best trend you've seen, the biggest trend you've seen? Where do you think women are excelling, and where do we need to be better? I think an ongoing thing that I hear, and an ongoing piece of advice that guests share. And also, Heather, I love this question because one of the things I value so much is that because we do interview women that's lives are very different, careers are very different, it's interesting that some of the advice string is kind of the same in many ways if you kind of listen a lot to the podcast, right? And we've had homeschooling moms. That was a great episode. There's a lot of talk and division around sometimes homeschooling moms and working moms, and but during the pandemic, I interviewed a friend that homeschooled because at the beginning of the pandemic, at least where I lived in Canada, we were just kind of sent home from school and there was no online school yet. And so we had her on to talk about her experience and to give us advice. And I loved that. I loved being able to learn from somebody like that and have those conversations. For the longest time, one of our most listened to episode was a stay-at-home mom friend of mine. And just bringing to life different people's worlds and learning about how they live, and there's advice again that you can apply, and understanding across different groups to have those important conversations. So one of the things that really has stood out to me is how much many women struggle to take the first step to change or to bold action, right? Or the first action that they need to take. And that can be, starting a business or asking for a increase in salary or all kinds of things. Women often have these dreams but are scared or stuck in circumstance. Like, there's so many reasons, but especially compared to men, women really struggle to step forwards. And it's one of the reasons I love interviewing people like Perry who are authentic leaders, because I want women to know that women who play big and take bold actions are, they don't wake up one day and have all these skill sets. They build them over time throughout their careers, right? So you build the experience and skill sets to have those jobs. And I also like when leaders share about the fact that they don't have it perfect and all together, because sometimes I think we look at these women and think, oh, like they never make mistakes and they don't struggle with work-life balance. Like they do. They do. And so it can be you. It doesn't have to be if you don't want it to be, but it can be. And so many times I think women take themselves out of the ring and we need to be more resilient and push forward. I have a lot of conversations with friends or other women just saying that in so many different circumstances where they're challenged by that. Even women that I know have the skill sets to do the job. And sometimes I'm just like, listen, you, I know that you can do this. It's not even a question. So you can do this. Like do it. And sometimes we need that tough love. I did a blog, I think, about this recently about how when you can't believe in yourself, believe in those around you. A boss is not going to offer you a management position or ask you to apply for a role if you're not ready. Like it will not happen. It just won't. And sometimes you're nervous and scared, but if everybody around you who really knows you is telling you to do it, then do it anyways. When I ran for politics, one of my most important mentors to me at the time told me not to do it. I did it anyways. Like you get to decide. And yeah, I hope that for women. That's one thing I think where we need to do better and where a lot of the advice has been is to take that first step, take that action. It's one step a day, one step forward. You're doing that side hustle and you want to move it forward. I'll give you an example. When I started Beacon North Strategies, which is my consulting firm, I started it part-time. I had been off ill with chronic illness, which if you've listened to early episodes of the podcast, you know that I have chronic migraine. But at the time, I was really sick and I hadn't been diagnosed yet. And I had been off work and I was just coming back to work. And my old employer offered me part time work because the founder of the organization had come back while I had been away and they had hired a few more people and the role just looked differently. So I started part time and then I started Beacon North Strategies because someone wanted me to take them on as a client. That had happened a few times, and I was like, sure, I'll do both of these things. I won't quite be working full time. Also, it was COVID at the time, and so that worked out well because I also had time to, help more with the kids stuff because my husband worked in a job that was considered like I forget the language, but like frontline, so he had to be at work, and so I was doing all the things by myself at home with the kids at working, doing school remotely and stuff like that. So so when I started my business, I started it part-time. And then eventually I made a plan to take that next step, which was to move the job that I had part-time to become a client of mine so that I could eventually do Beacon North part-time. So it was a couple years until I stepped into Beacon North full-time. So Beacon North is actually coming up on its 5-year anniversary. And it's only been the last couple of years that I've been in it full time, where that, pays my salary and is my career. But you can take baby steps and you just need to take a step forward and then the next step forward, right? And you can listen to podcasts, you can get advice from people, you can ask people in leadership for coffee. Like you would be so surprised. And you can slowly build that network of people when things come up and you don't know what to do or you don't know what that next step is, you ask them, or you listen to a free podcast, or you read a book, right? So you can do the hard things. Ninia asked, who's your dream guest that you haven't had yet? That's a great question. I think it probably depends on the day, but the one that first came to mind when you asked me that, I would say is Reese Witherspoon. I think I partially say that because I have an affinity to her because when I was younger, I looked more like her. I was, a lot skinnier and very blonde, and people told me all the time, like I get in a cab to go somewhere and people be like, you look like Reese Witherspoon. And I'd be like, I know. With my dark hair and all that right now, I can't say that I do as I've maybe gotten older, but I just love what she stands for too. She's really found ways to empower women and lift their stories and, break barriers and create new paths in Hollywood for women. And she's just a real champion for them. And I love that so much. And just some of the messages in Legally Blonde. And I don't know, I have an affinity for pink. I remember when I first started my business, you'll see behind me if you're watching this on YouTube that I have a lot of pink accents, and that was on purpose. Yes, I work a corporate job, but I want to bring some of my authentic self to my job. I am a really feminine woman. I like to call myself medium maintenance, not high maintenance, not low maintenance. And the pink lawyer, maybe that's accused of being ditzy, but is super smart, is something that I identify with as well. And so that would be very cool to have her on. Reese, if you ever listen to this. Laura Hall, one of my friends, who's also been in some of the roundtables I've had with friends, says, "What have you learned speaking with all these amazing people? Have you changed your approach in any aspect of your life based on these conversations?" I would say I have a lot more awareness and empathy of how I approach people in situations, I think. I've learned a lot about resilience, changing circumstances, and not giving up and to keep getting up when things are hard. Like failure isn't a failure. It's a something you've learned and to step forward. And I also would say it's a constant reminder that so many people go through really tough things in their lives. And we won't know about most of those. Even people who are on social media a lot, we will not know about those things. And and this is always something I've held to, but just hearing some of people's stories and what they've been through, it's also amazing what they've overcome. And it just reminds me so much the importance to be kind and that you don't know what people are going through. Jessica Jansen, who is a speaker, author, coach, and philanthropist. She's an author and she's been on the podcast, says, "Congrats on 200 episodes. Many people talk a lot about wanting to do things. Few take action and even fewer stay the course. Congrats on being an action taker and helping share important voices. Cheers to many more episodes." Thank you, Jessica. Jessica, I mean, that's exactly what I was talking about earlier about taking action, right? Being stubborn about it. Jessica has a son who passed away. And I believe, Miranda, I'm trying to remember if Miranda interviewed Jessica. I think she did. Anyways, Jessica's story was also about the loss of a child, and Miranda has also lost a child. And just her resilience and the important work that she's doing to continue to bring joy to the world is really important. And so thank you, Jessica, for telling your story, sharing your story of resilience and hope with us. It's so important, and so many people go through challenging things. Julie Caffley, who is the executive director of Catalyst, which is a really important organization. A huge congrats to Stephanie on 200 episodes. Thank you for always keeping it real, being such a fabulous advocate for Canadian women. Thank you, Julie. And again, it's been an awesome opportunity to have people can bring forward some Canadian women that people might not know. Canada's population is not really that big. And even though we are a huge landmass, but we have some pretty phenomenal women here and pretty phenomenal women leaders. And it's been really exciting to share some of those with the world. Amy Cryer Persifield, a very well-known TikTok influencer, writes, "Cheers to one of Canada's leading female-driven podcasts. I'm personally so lucky to have gotten to know Stephanie through her podcast and social media channels, and Canada's so lucky to have her north of the border. She's an inspiration to all North American women to chase their dreams and not be afraid to take big swings. Congrats on 200 episodes." Thank you, Amy. One of the wonderful things also about this podcast is just getting to know these exciting women, and Amy and I have become friends and are often sending each other messages and just encouraging each other. And that episode is really about she has done influencing in different capacities. She's also an expert in marketing. And right now she is doing a lot of content about being American living in Canada. And that was a pretty neat episode about some of the challenges that we're seeing between our two countries right now. Believe we did this episode after Trump was elected about the beginning of the tariff war. And so it was really interesting to just kind of unpack what's going on in the United States and some of the differences between our two countries because people don't realize, I think, sometimes how different Canada and the United States are. And so she's been learning a lot about Canada, doing some political content. And I do some of that on my Stephanie Mitten podcast, and so, or not podcast, but TikTok. So, because we have the Women Don't Do That TikTok and Stephanie one. And so it has been great to get to know her. So you should check out her content as well if you're interested in that. We also have a video that somebody submitted. Okay, so this is Jen Harper, who is the founder of Cheekbone Beauty.
Hey Stephanie, Jen here. Congratulations. I have a question for you. What is your must have makeup if you were on a desert island? What would you have to have? A mascara, a lip product, could be a lip oil, lipstick, or are you a blush girl? Or if it's not any of these three, let me know which one. I think my best advice for women, because as a young woman myself, I struggled with this until I hit 40 and it was worrying about what everybody thinks. So the sooner you can stop worrying about what everyone thinks, the happier you're going to be. Congratulations, Stephanie, on 200 episodes. Wishing you all the best.
I love that. Thank you, Jen, for taking the time to do that. That is so sweet of you. Okay, if I love this question. If you could, okay, if I could only have one thing, I think it would be blush because you could, or no, it would be lipstick because you could do your lips, you could do some blush. I am so pale. Um, very, very pale person, especially in real life. I have lots of blush on right now, so you can imagine how pale I am. And you can also use it for eyeshadow. And I have to say that I bought some lipstick before from your company, and it has been one of my favorites. And Jen is coming out with some really interesting and unique products, and I love that you are a Canadian-owned brand. So make sure you check out Jen and her brand as well. That's amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time to do that. Um, and I loved the advice that you shared as well. I'm trying to think, I think I answered all the questions for that. All right. So what is up for the next 200 episodes? Guest types, we'd love to have on. So we started with having women more in just male dominated fields or overcoming barriers and giving advice to women. But it's really expanded to kind of the whole life of a woman when I look about, women living their best lives or women feeling empowered to do whatever it is they think they can't. A lot of that for me is career, but it also comes to your everyday life, right? What are the barriers you're facing at home? Are you having challenges with maybe getting a spouse to step up and help more on the home? Are you struggling with work-life balance? Are you healthy? I want to have conversations about things like endometriosis, things that we're learning more about in terms of women's health. And so, really covering a range of topics, but overall, the focus on inspiring you to live your best life and to do whatever it is you think you can't, and advice for women overall will still be the overarching conversation. Topics I'm really interested in right now, and I wouldn't say that, I don't know that we're going, how we're going, or if we're going to talk about them on the podcast. They are some that I'm exploring on the Women Don't Do That social media if you want to check them out. Is really reflective of where we are at in the world right now. And so some of the things that I've been reflecting on are faith and women, finances, and some of the things that I'm seeing now that I'm in my 40s, from the relationships around me, from social media, things like in divorce, how do women make sure that they are able to take care of themselves? If somebody is a stay-at-home mom and maybe is in an abusive relationship, how do they financially take care of themselves? And that perplexity there between, women choosing what they want in their life, which maybe is being a stay-at-home parent. Um, but then in those situations where they become really challenging and you do need to leave that relationship to then not have the finances, right? So unpacking some of those things. Men and women, toxic masculinity, the rise of misogyny right now is really scary. I don't know if some of you would have seen, but there's a pastor in the States who's been talking up about women not like shouldn't have the right to vote. And this is not just a random person in the corner. This is someone who is the pastor of a church that one of Trump's, in Canada, we would call them ministers, retweeted and goes to himself. And that's really scary to me. And I did grow up in a faith community. And just what I'm seeing from some people in that faith. And it's really challenging. And so just thinking about some of those things. And also skills for women, right? We need to continue to build our skills. I want to make sure that we're talking about, how do you ask for a raise and all those kinds of conversations that we struggle with. Some ways to engage with listeners. So I'm spending a lot more time on TikTok and, of course, on Instagram. And I have those both private and for women don't do that. And so if you want more of a look of my life behind the scenes, and maybe my opinions or more advice that I have, please check those out. If you're interested in Canadian politics or advocacy, you should definitely check out my Stephanie Mitten TikTok or my Instagram. I talk also a lot when I'm talking about my own story and things like that, and some of this is definitely on the Women Don't Do That TikTok, is I came from a small rural community in Canada. I didn't come, from parents with university degrees, although very, very bright people. I'm so proud of my parents. My dad was self-taught and ran the robotics program at the big college in Ottawa. And my mom was a small business owner as a hairdresser, and I'm so proud of them. But it did mean that, compared to some of my colleagues in university, I didn't know uh, people who worked in the public service and things like that to look up to. I do have an aunt that works in the public service, but, those big, broad connections. I grew up in a Christian community. Again, I talked about when I came to Ottawa, I didn't know anybody. I built my network and my career myself. I struggle with migraines. I have chronic migraines. There's things I have to do every day related to my migraines. And I also have ADHD and I'm a mom. So you'll hear more about that, about some of my tips and tricks or just how I live my life. And also things about work. I'm a boss, I'm an owner of a company. And so I share some of those things too. So you can connect with me there. I, of course, am always so excited, and we definitely put this out on social sometimes to get advice from you about who some of our guests or topics should be. You can always DM me your ideas. I love hearing, what a podcast meant to you. So feel free to share that with me as well. I do read the feedbacks and reviews that you leave on the different listening channels, and those things do make a difference. It helps us rank better and people find us. If I can ask one thing of this episode, my goal is to reach and inspire as many women as possible. So if you would be willing to take a screenshot of you listening to this and share it on your stories on social or post it on your wall somewhere, that really makes a big difference for us. And as we close, I really want to thank you for listening. I want to thank all of the guests who have given their really valuable time to me. The production team that puts this together, it used to just be me and Miranda. But now I have staff and we all take little bits and support that. We have a podcast editor who has worked with us since he was a teenager in high school, and it's a boy. And Ben, we've loved having you here and loved your commitments to this. And when we first started, we couldn't afford production, but Ben goes to the local high school here, and I had heard that they have a really talented program for video and audio editing. And so we reached out to the high school and they recommended Ben. And so Ben, I remember when we first started this, he would talk about how he's having such interesting conversations with his mom about topics, right? And expanding his horizons too. And sometimes they'll send me little messages. I loved this, or this was great advice. And I love hearing that. And so thank you, Ben, for being here along the way for so many years. He's now through college and does video editing and photography work, and has also been traveling and living abroad. And so it's been fun to be part of so many different moments of your life. And some of you have been here since episode 1, and others are new here. So thank you so much. I could not have done this without you. I can't do this without you. And I want to thank you for that so much. So please listen, review, send in your stories. I love hearing them. And yeah, feel free to give your suggestions as well. Here's to the next chapter, to redefining your possible. And of course, as always, we will do that together. I'm excited for what's coming ahead. I have future big ideas for the podcast. And we do have a Patreon that right now is pretty basic. But in the future, I do hope to kind of expand that and those types of offerings and ways for us to work and spend time together. And so, if you do really want to support the podcast and reach other women beyond taking that screenshot, supporting the podcast, which is almost exclusively funded by me personally. So that would make a big difference in our ability to reach more women. And we already do have some Patreon followers who have been here for many years, actually. And I really want to thank you for your commitment as well, because you help make this possible. So thank you, everybody. I hope you have a great day, and I can't wait for you to hear the next episode. Okay, have a great day. Thanks for joining us on Women Don't Do That. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating or review. Connect with us on Instagram at Women Don't Do That, and visit our website, www.womendon'tdothat.com, for more details. Join our Patreon to support our work. Find all of the links in the show notes. Remember, you have the power to transform your what ifs into let's go. Together, let's redefine your possible. Until next time. The opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Women Don't Do That, Stephanie Mitten, or affiliated brands.